Hi, Kevin Wright back here with another property finance tip. And what's the subject this week? Well, it's HMOs. And the question is, are HMOs all they're cracked up to be? Want to find out more about this? Keep watching. Now, HMOs have got a big pull as a strategy for investors, and it's been hammered out of property training courses for most of the past decade, which means that tens of thousands of investors have been enlightened that HMOs are the way to prosperity in property. And hey, get 1, 2 or 3 HMOs and the income from that means you can give up your day job. Now, for a lot of investors, that's a very powerful pull. But is that the whole story, or are there other things going on with HMOs that maybe don't get talked about quite as much? Let's have a drill down and see what we can find. I don't know about you, but I've never actually spoken to anyone that tells me that they dreamed while they were growing up that they get to share a house with 4 or 5 other people that they don't know. Now, that's the reality of most HMOs, isn't it? You share your house, you share where you live with a bunch of people that at the time you move in, you don't know. Yes, there can be exceptions with a bunch of students or a bunch of mates all getting together, but most of the time, HMO tenants do not know each other at the time they move in. Now, in many cases, the motivation to live in an HMO room rather than a flat or a house is purely financial. Given the choice, an HMO tenant loves to rent a flat. However, their disposable income doesn't stretch that far. Can't rent a house, can't rent a flat, need to live somewhere. What's left? HMO room. So given that many HMO tenants would rather not be living there if they didn't have to, then it's fair to say that in one sense, they're planning to move out the day they move in. As soon as their financial circumstances improve, they're off. Now, what are the 2 big factors that would alter an HMO tenant's financial disposable income? So the first one is getting a new job, getting a promotion, getting a big pay rise. So in other words, they end up with more money in their bank account every month. And now they think, hey, I can afford to rent a flat or maybe even a house. And that's the end of your HMO tenant. The second big change that can happen to someone is they buddy up with one other person, either romantically or platonically. And sharing a flat or house with one other person is a different proposition to sharing it with a bunch of people, particularly if there's a romantic involvement. Now, all this means that tenant churn you can expect to be higher in HMOs. And every time a tenant leaves, you've got a potential void until you can replace them. Hopefully, that'll be a quick process, but it's not always the case. Now, of course, one of the big advantages of an HMO is by renting by the room and not the whole property, you can stack up a much bigger profit on a monthly basis than with a single let. And you often see sums talked about of make £1,000 a month out of one house, which of course is fantastic when it works. But for most HMOs of the smaller variety, the 4, the 5, the 6 bedroom ones, the premise that this is based on is that the HMO is fully let. If you're running with one room empty for a month or more than a month, then that's a significant chunk of, let's say, that £1,000 gone. And you're back to not much more than the profit you'd make on a single let, but with all the extra hassle of an HMO. Now, this is not so relevant with the bigger HMOs where it's 8, 10 or even more bedrooms, but 6 or less tenants and it becomes quite relevant. Another aspect of HMOs is wear and tear. Now, 4, 5 or 6 people all in a house means that HMOs typically get a harder life than. And as someone that's run HMOs in the past, I know that the repair bills and the redecoration bills were higher in multiple occupancy properties than in the single let type, even if there was a family in there. Supply and demand is a big factor, as it is with any type of rental property. You need to have, ideally, more people looking to rent it than properties available to rent, or in HMO's case, rooms available to rent. And in some parts of the country, that is undoubtedly the case, but possibly not all parts of the country. Now, I said earlier that HMO courses have been churning out investors for HMOs by the thousand for the best part of the last decade, which means that there are tens and tens of thousands of investors that previously didn't invest in HMOs that now want to. The inherent danger in this is that in certain pockets of the country, there's an oversaturation of HMO houses where supply exceeds demand. And if you need your HMO to be full to get the rental income that you've been anticipating, and it isn't full, that can be a problem. Now, if you've got supply outstripping demand, there are typically two ways for an HMO landlord to try and combat that. One is to up the spec, and we've seen quite a bit of that in recent years. So you can be spending ever more money on upgrading the quality of your HMO to attract tenants, which of course is an increase in cost. The other key way of attracting tenants to an HMO in an area where there's oversupply is you reduce the rent. Now, reducing the rent to fill your vacant HMO rooms doesn't do much for the profitability of your HMO. And the councils are having an effect here as well. Now, in a number of areas across the country, Article 4 restrictions are in place and having been imposed by the council in the last few years. So Article 4 is where the council has withdrawn the permitted development right to convert any residential property into an HMO of up to 6 bedrooms. More than 6 bedrooms, you need planning permission for a change of use. But up to 6 bedrooms, you've got a permitted development right to make that conversion. Now, when a council considers that the number of HMOs in a particular vicinity has increased to the point where it's detrimental to that community, they can impose an Article 4 restriction, which means you cannot just convert the property to an HMO. You have to get permission from the council, same way as you get planning permission to do anything else. And the second way councils are influencing what happens in HMOs is that some councils now apply council tax per room, not per property. One of the common problems with councils is they're strapped for cash. So any way of making money by imposing additional charges can be looked at positively by a council. HMO licenses is a good case in point. Now, HMO licenses are a great revenue earner for a council. And if they can charge Band A council tax per room with an HMO and not per property, that again is another handy revenue stream. Now, by no means all councils across the country are doing that at this moment in time. There's no saying that it won't get more prevalent in the months and years to come. So councils are also doing their bit to challenge the profitability of HMO owners. Another factor with being an HMO landlord is the interaction between these tenants that were previously unknown to each other. And there's the potential for conflict there, from the relatively minor "who's nicked my sausages" type of disagreement to the more serious things like sexual, racial harassment and even mental or physical abuse. And as the landlord, it often falls to you to police these sort of disagreements. Now, you might be thinking, hey, Kevin, you're painting a really black picture of HMOs. Well, as I said at the start, there's a lot of HMO landlords and a lot of HMOs that run very successfully in the country. But that's not the same as saying there's endless opportunities to make money at HMOs. So the watchword here, I think, is with any HMO purchases, due diligence is key. Looking at all those things. Supply and demand is a massive one. Is there actually a demand for HMOs where you're intending to buy a property? There will of course be HMO licensing, but what is the council's attitude to council tax? And what contingency plans do you have to resolve inter-tenant conflict? And what things can you do to make HMO tenants feel a bit more wanted so that they're less likely to leave as quickly? So there we are, that's my take on HMOs for this week. I'd like to say it's realistic and not pessimistic. And if you're into HMOs, I hope they prove to be a very successful investment for you. Now, before you click off, hang around a minute because there's something I want to tell you. Thanks for watching this video. And if you enjoyed it, come spend some more time with me. Come and check out my property finance masterclass. Click the link here, go check it out.